fixed or variable, are obviously relevant. Depreciation costs. What do you think? These are non-cash expenses. So should they be relevant or not? When you charge depreciation, that doesn't create an actual cash expense. So since we're thinking about cash flow of the firm, well, the first instinct is it's not relevant. That is a yes and a no. Yes, they're not relevant because they're not cash, but they have a cash flow effect on the firm. How do you think is that? Huh? Overall what? No. I mean, that may or may not be the case, but we're interested in whether or not it affects the actual cash flow. And I'm claiming it does. And can you guess how? What's special about depreciation? When a firm charges double the depreciation compared to last year, what sort of effect that's going to have? There is an entity that cares about that depreciation cost. Exactly. If depreciation expenses go up, they actually reduce your net income or taxable income, which means they reduce the taxes. So they are relevant only through their tax effect. So in that sense, come on, they do affect the cash flow of the firm. I'm gonna do the easier one first. Financing costs or interest expenses. This is kind of a tricky one. Your first instinct is to say yes, interest expenses should be relevant, but we are not going to view them as relevant because a project stands alone, right? The project itself doesn't borrow money. Uh, whether or not the project finances or the firm finances itself 100% equity or 100% debt, that has no bearing on whether or not this is a worthwhile project. They are not directly relevant, but they still can affect the decision through their effect on the cost of capital. So we're not going to actually add interest expenses as part of what you want to call cash flows, but that doesn't mean that they don't come into the picture. Uh, if the firm finances itself with debt, then the cost of debt itself is going to show itself on cost of capital. Or if they finance them through mostly equity, cost of equity is going to affect the cost of capital. But as far as interest expenses themselves are considered, they are not part of the project cash flows. Sunk costs. Who's going to tell me what a sunk cost is? You should remember this from your basic econ class, and we obviously talked about in basic finance class. At least in my class, we talked about it. I can't be sure of other sections. I wasn't there. If you can't give a description, a definition, think of an example and talk about that. An example of a sunk cost. Anyone?
Like money already spent, like I don't know, you've already spent it, so it's not worth considering anymore.
Yeah, you already spent something, and whether or not you accept a project, that money is not coming back. Okay? These are costs that have already been incurred prior to the decision stage. Hence, they are not relevant. Think of an example. You're going to build a new assembly line in Kentucky, and in order to figure out uh, what it's going to cost in terms of both acquiring and uh, building it, you hire the company to come up with an estimate, right? You know, how much it's going to cost to get the permits, how much it's going to cost to build it, so on and so forth. And this may be an architecture firm. You pay them $100,000. But this is prior to building is actually being built. Then I'm going to decide whether or not to build it. I'm going to use the information that I gain from that research to project what sort of cash flows this project is going to have or what sort of cost it's going to have. But I already spent it. Whether or not I go ahead with the project or I say, okay, this project is not adding value to our firm, I spent that money. Hence, it's not relevant. Again, the incremental cash flow principle. With the project, I spent 100,000. Without the project, I spent 100,000. So incremental cash flow, as far as that sunk cost is concerned, is zero. Opportunity costs. Who's going to tell me what's an example of an opportunity cost? Or if you want to give a definition, that's fine too. It's value of your second best option. Generic definition. they are relevant. An example of that, suppose you're going to build this assembly line, okay? But firm already has land somewhere in, let's say, I don't know, northern Kentucky, close to the airport, for obvious reasons. Let's say Hebron, Kentucky. And you spent $50 million on that land, and if you sold it in the market, it's going to be worth $60 million. Since we're already thinking about cost of machinery, land, and buildings, you have three options. It could be zero, enter zero as the cost of that land, 50 million since you company spent $50 million on it, or 60 million, the current value of the land. So what do you think it should be? And use the standalone principle. Remember, the project is an island by itself, okay? So the project doesn't own the land, the firm does. If you're using that land, that actually costs something to the firm. They could have done something with that, right? They could have sold it in the market for $60 million. By not doing that, the project effectively bought that land for $60 million from the firm. So-called side effects. These are increases in or increase or decreases in costs and or revenues of the firm through its existing business. Such as cannibalism and or so-called cross-market selling. Biggest example of this is a company like Gillette. About 20 years ago, maybe even 25 years ago, Gillette products had only one blade. Then they came up with 2 blades, 3 blades. Then Schick came along, did their Quattro, and Gillette simply said, okay, I'm not going to do 4. They just jumped to 5, which is where they are now. When you go from 3 blade to 5 blades, what happens to the, I'm sure you're going to sell a lot of the 5 blade business, right? I mean, I'm a sucker when it comes to that. When I shave, I like a very close shave, especially before a date. My face has to be like baby's bottom. You know, you're going on a date, you got to try all the angles. There's not much to work with here anyway. So I'm going to buy the 5 blade. But what do I do when I buy the 5 blade? I don't buy the 3 blade anymore, okay? So they're going to lose sales of the 3 blade.